What's up, everybody? Welcome to the iProv Made podcast, where we teach you how to run a profitable practice. I'm Jordan Smith, VP of Sales and Marketing with iProv, and co-host along with RJ Martino, President, CEO of iProv, and I guess founder of the iProv Made podcast. What's up, RJ?
Hey, Jordan. How are you?
I'm doing good. Hey, I am super excited to bring everybody our guest for today. Brian Fanzo. RJ, tell us a little bit about Brian.
Brian Fanzo came to us by referral because he speaks at every conference ever he speaks so much that this is just like another day for him. You know, a lot of times guests get a little flustered that they're going to be on. This is just another day in the office for Brian. Brian's a virtual keynote speaker and a digital futurist. And you always love hearing titles like digital futurist. So he's going to talk about how that came to be. He's going to talk about what that means. And he's going to talk about how you should change your perspective on how you see technology and the way it impacts, your practice, your business, and things like that.
Yeah, and just a way to think about how to promote your own brand. You know, every organization, whether you're a doctor or a CPA firm or whoever you are out there listening, every organization should be in the business of sales and marketing. And Brian's going to talk a lot about his perspective on that. And there's a ton of good takeaways. I mean, we could have talked to Brian for half the day. So without further ado, let's kick it off. Brian Fanzo, everybody.
Welcome to the iProv Made podcast, where we help you build a more profitable practice. I'm here with my great co-host, Jordan Smith. Hey, Jordan.
Hey, RJ. How are you?
Dude, I'm excited. I've got a friend of mine ready to rock your socks off. So let's jump right into it. I always like to start this before we introduce our great guest and kind of talk about our thoughts behind how to build a profitable practice. And it is a very simple process. The first one is, like in any other healthcare world, is listen to what are the symptoms of the problems you have. And that's what we do. We usually sit down and we just hear a bunch of symptoms of, physicians or physician adjacent companies talk about problems. The second thing is make sure that we're working with someone who is willing to be completely accountable for the problem. We say the bad news is this is all your fault. The good news is this is all your fault. You've got the ability to change any of these symptoms. The third thing is triaging the problem, really digging into what those symptoms are, asking, a question behind the question. Once we triage the problem, it usually falls into three different buckets, Brian. The first one is usually they don't have a vision for the future. And so we help often just building out what the vision of their future looks like, because without a vision, the people will perish. Once you've figured out what your vision looks like, and there's a whole process for that, we then build the strategy on how to build that vision and make it a reality. We build the tactics so that we know exactly what we're going to do day in and day out. It's the workout plan. And then after we've built those things, we talk about how to keep accountability within your employees, within your vendors. And that usually means recurring meetings, scorecards, quarterly meetings, whatever it is. But that's kind of our thought process on how to build a profitable. And the last thing is you've got to work all that out. So the very last step is engaging your team. And that is getting the work done. And so when I talk to people, I like to figure out where these people fall into place. And so I am excited to bring Brian Fanzo to our podcast today. Jordan, do you want to talk about Brian Fanzo and where he fits at in this our overall thought process?
Yeah, we're really excited to have Brian on. Brian, welcome. Keynote speaker, a digital futurist, talks to businesses, brands about how to move their organization forward. Brian, welcome so much. Tell us, start us off by just telling us what's a digital futurist?
Sure. No, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. for me, a digital futurist was one of those things that it was actually my speaker agent kind of donned the label and was like, hey, this is what you should be talking about. And I've always been someone that's been proud to have no niche. I've been a big believer that if you have a niche or a niche, you should own it, double down on it, make it your thing. But if you don't have one, I'm kind of like the poster boy for how you can still succeed without having that, or while you're still discovering that. But from my background, I think rather unique in where I sit today. Went to college for business information systems, computer science. Ended up getting a job at UPS, actually delivering packages out of college because I couldn't find a job in IT here in Northern Virginia where I live. But I got my first break as into the U.S. government. I had no background, and I started working at a cybersecurity help desk. That was really supporting active duty military and their cybersecurity solutions. And this was late 2004, 2005, and way early in the cybersecurity game of what was going on. And I like to say my world kind of changed on Friday afternoon when the kind of general manager of the help desk that we pretty much came in and said, hey, anyone here want to raise their hand and volunteer to go to Korea on Monday? And I happened to have my hand up first. And he called my name and was like, Brian, do you have a passport? I was like, no. I was like, I've been on a cruise like in the Caribbean. And he's like, you're prepared to go teach the course that we were troubleshooting in Korea? And I was like, no. But I can promise by Monday I'll be ready, and it's a long flight. And that Saturday, I went down to Washington, D.C. and got a same-day passport, which was like a 6-hour process back then in 2005.
Does that even exist anymore? Is there such thing as a same-day passport these days?
I believe there is, but I believe you had to have one before. I don't think you can do one now having never had one. I think if you've had one previously, you can, but I'm not sure if you can do it the way that I did it back then, which was, even now thinking about it was kind of wild. And that was Saturday. And then Sunday, I told my wife at the time I had no kids. And I said, hey, I'm flying on a 13.5-hour flight to Seoul, Korea, taking a 2.5-hour high-speed train down to Daegu. And I'm going to teach, 35, active duty military members on a cybersecurity tool that I'd only really been working on as a help desk person for about 6 months. So I spent that entire flight learning the manual, going through all the different processes, and then kind of dove into that experience. And for me, a lot of that, I wasn't a great student in college, but I loved college. I played college hockey. I was president of my fraternity, and very active in the college world, but I wasn't a great student. And a lot of that has to do with, I can probably segue into being diagnosed ADHD at 31 years old, not being diagnosed earlier on in my life. But so for me, it was, when I took on this challenge of being an instructor, and it was part of this my idea of like, hey, I'm gonna try it out and see what I can do. And the short in that whole piece is I taught the 5-day class on the flight back. I landed in Atlanta at the time, and I had an international BlackBerry that they had provided me, and I turned on my international BlackBerry, and there was an email from our superior government to my boss, kind of CCing me, and pretty much said, the feedback and information from that course is unlike anything we've seen for that course from the previous instructors. And if you're willing to have Brian do more of those, we'll add 4 more classes a month to our calendar for the rest of the year to have Brian take that over. And I can tell you, it was I got back into the office that following week, and I was kind of promoted 3 levels up. I all of a sudden got employees that were direct reporting to me. The person that had actually hired me was actually technically under me in the chain of command, and I ran with that role for about 8 years. I grew it to a team of 32 people. I've traveled during that time to 56 countries, every U.S. military base outside of the United States, teaching courses as well as briefing the different leaders on the value of what we were deploying in cybersecurity. And really my job was to help get the different branches of military as well as government to share cybersecurity policies amongst themselves, right? Like getting the Navy to share their cybersecurity policy with the Army. And I like to say, like, it taught me really how hard collaboration could truly be in that piece of it. And also at the same time, this was very early days cybersecurity, and I was very lucky to have a great boss that was a great reverse mentor for me. I was labeled oftentimes as like the only non-gray-haired person on our team, which then I got to get my first speaking role. They sent me to training for speaking, and it was a path I never would have thought I would have jumped on, but it's one that I was truly thankful to be on. And I like I said, I did it for 9 years, and after 9 years, I was actually getting promoted, and we were switching contracts, and I kind of had this, I'd say, epiphany, or this.
Well, before
yeah.
you move, I just, it's just amazing because you think about the serendipity of you saying yes to something that, in any career, in anybody's life, there's a big part of you that probably was scared of the unknown.
Oh, yes.
But also at the same time, like just looking forward to the adventure. And we kind of lose that as we get older and get a little more comfortable. And now we got the excuse of, but my kids that are at home, and none of that would have happened had you not just said yes and taken on the challenge. And that's what, for me, a lot of leadership is not that we're born and all of a sudden we come out and we look like Peyton Manning and we're directing the field. A lot of times it's just nobody else wanted to say yes to this challenge, and in that situation, you're just where they said, who wants to go, and your hand was first to go up. A lot of times it's nobody else's hands go up, and I'm the only one who raised their hand and said, I'll do it. If we need it done, I'll do it. That's what, so now to hear that an avalanche of opportunity came after that is just incredible.
Yeah, and it's really what I can attribute to so much of what I do now, right? The book that I'm writing that will be out very soon, and the podcast that I most recently launched is called Press the Damn Button. And it's technically in that same essence of it's really what's worked for me in my career, in the sense of, hey, I'm going to volunteer. I joked early on that the reason I put my hand up so fast was I didn't like the 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift I was on. And I was willing to take anything that was not going into Washington, D.C. at 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. But that to me, embodies a lot of the world we're living in today, right? Where it's not like the adage of faking it till you make it. Rather, it's, hey, let's dive in and figure out what works, and put the doors on the Lamborghini as you're driving it, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And I think that's kind of the beauty of kind of the space that I've kind of fallen into now, because I left that government role after 9 years, and it was really one of those things where during a promotion ceremony, the boss was like, "You're the youngest senior VP we've ever had. We've had to rewrite some of our things because Brian didn't have a master's degree, and we wanted to get him in this role." And I got this feeling, was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And 9 years in the government, 9 years doing what I was doing, cybersecurity was taking off. It was one of those pivotal moments for me. It was like, I either stay here and do this for the rest of my life and really do it well, or I kind of chase this dream that I've had since I was younger, which was really to be a technology evangelist, which was modeled after Guy Kawasaki, which is what he was for Steve Jobs and Apple. And so I ended up taking that, I kind of did another version of raising your hand, and I decided to leave that role, give up my security clearance. And I went from, government cybersecurity to a very sexy industry called the data center. And I say that as tongue-in-cheek as you could possibly be. There's probably no more technology, more, I'd say, boring and kind of out of touch in the tech space, but it was a role that really excited me. It was a startup. They were moving into the cloud computing innovation space, and it was super interesting. I worked for an enterprise tech company, BAE Systems, for the government, and then I went and worked for this startup, and we ended up hiring 12 new hires a week for almost 2 years. I was employee 256. Wow. I remember that because computer geek, and when you get your employee number and it was 256, I was like, that's pretty interesting. And I was there for 2 years and 10 days, and we had over 600 employees when I left. And I was actually kind of given that role that I always had thought I wanted. Direct report to the CEO. I had a dotted line to the CMO and a dotted line to the CIO. And I kind of played in this evangelist role, and I'm so thankful for that role. And it taught me a lot. I got to speak at a lot of events, got to do a lot of things with giant, big brands on helping them move into the cloud, but also understand how not to disrupt the legacy systems in the world that they had built. And then that startup actually got acquired, and they pretty much came in. It was CenturyLink was the company acquiring them, and they pretty much came in and said, "What is an evangelist? How do you not have KPIs or sales quotas? I think today needs to be your last day." And I like to say that was my foray. That was my kick into entrepreneurship, which is now a little over 5 years. It was 5 years now owning my own business as of last month. And yeah, that's kind of where I, kind of got kicked in the world I was. I had done so much speaking and doing a lot of things, but as I went back on my own, I started kind of rebuilding what I was doing. I had a podcast, a couple online shows. I was building my social media audience. And then, I like to say, for me, this kind of was all in this idea of kind of finding my fit, finding where I told my story. And I like to kind of say, for me, a pivotal day, the raising the hand was a pivotal day in early on my career. But one of the pivotal days for me was actually November 2nd, 2013. And it's actually, my mom, I'll give credit to. I'm a mama's boy, not afraid to admit it. And my mom had kind of called me out and said, "Brian, I see what you're doing on social media, and I see that you're kind of playing in this space, but she made the comment, I don't see you wearing a hat, and I don't see you really being the person that has found success." And she's like, "I'm just curious, are you being yourself with what you're sharing online?" And of course, 2013, I'm 30 years old. I'm like, "Yeah, Mom, of course. You don't know what you're talking about, Mom. This social media, it's before you and I hung up the phone, and I remember I kind of sat there and I went into the mirror in my bathroom at the time, and I wrote just the words "be yourself" in very big, bold letters with a Sharpie on the mirror. I don't recommend using a Sharpie on a mirror because that's very hard to get out. But the premise was that day I went from looking at social and digital and the world online, from trying to say or put out what I thought other people wanted to hear, and I started sharing kind of my story. And I'm very blessed now. I've been to 76 countries total. I speak at about 65 to 70 events a year of brands and businesses and industries of all walks of life. And my focus as a futurist is to help us embrace change, help us see the synergy between digital innovation and humanity. So I talk a lot about empathy. I talk about building your business through social listening and understanding your customer needs. So RJ, I really like the way you set that up starting off, because I was nodding in not only in how we have to build businesses and look at this space, but a lot of what I help leaders do online is what they do really great traditionally, but we have kind of a disconnect or a roadblock, or maybe stuck in our ways. And so that's kind of been my interesting journey to where I'm at now. And I'm very blessed. I get to do what I love, although COVID definitely disrupted that. But I'm now doing all virtual presentations. I've done 46 virtual presentations since March 30th. So I can say I'm all in on virtual at the moment. But yeah, that's my world. I'm also a proud dad of 3 little girls. And I kind of teased in there, another piece that really changed a lot of my life was being diagnosed ADHD at 31. And it's something I talk a lot about on stage. It's something I'm a big advocate for across my social media and kind of the brands I'm working with as well. So yeah, that's that in a nutshell.
I'd like to talk more about that. I always think it's interesting because ADHD people are often branded as the problem child in the class. And then we see lots of high achievers in the ADHD world, even in the healthcare space. I mean, there are lots of physicians that have succeeded with a diagnosis like that too. But kind of before we get into that, thinking about the change you're trying to impart on people, when you're on stage, when you're talking to those people, talk about maybe the mindset shift that you like them. Maybe they came in and they start at point A, and after they listen to you, you've moved their mindset, their thought, or even their actions over to point B. Like, what does that perspective change usually look like in lots of the conferences?
Well, you hit it home right there. It's a perspective change, right? I'm not oftentimes asking someone to believe in something they don't believe in, or one of the things I ask is let's take an open mind. Now, I will tell you, I'm a big kind of believer in playing into my strengths, playing into the psychology of different things. And so, I wear a backwards hat and bright colored shoes, usually a t-shirt on the stage. And I've done that in front of, the Pentagon with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've done that with, executive leadership brands. I've been an influencer for 17 of the Fortune 100 companies that are out there. And part of that also, I get a very polarizing, view sometimes, or I get someone that will judge a book by a cover. And a lot of that is very deliberate for me. And I always like to say, I get to bring people on a journey from like, oh God, another millennial that, was wearing his backwards shoes and his hat. And does he need a participation trophy? Is he going to whine about something? And I kind of play into that. And then I kind of bring them on the journey to really what, a lot of my career, and I kind of didn't mentioned this before, but I had 34 people that ended up working directly for me across my team. We were managing, a $9 million a year budget for the group that we were deploying. And the context of that is the first 30 of those employees were all older than I was. Because in cybersecurity, there wasn't even a major. No one was going to school for that at the time. And not to mention, you had to get a security clearance. And in the early 2000s, they hadn't really loosened the parameters around security clearances. So drugs and a lot of things that were like very hardcore that you had to be like never had been in the proximity of, made it very hard for a certain demographic to kind of get into that space. And so my first 29 employees were older than I was. I also, kind of segue it to my, I was a fraternity president my sophomore year in college. The fraternity president we had actually got sick, and they had to rewrite the bylaws so that I could be the president as a sophomore. And I like to say, like, even that little experience of learning how to, respect experience and realize that leadership doesn't mean I know everything and I have to lead from the front. And, a lot of these things that have kind of played throughout my life. And so I try to kind of connect those dots with the audience on where we're going and the value of digital and virtual. And, a big piece for me is that I'm a big believer in that for us to change today, it's not for us to believe that what we've been doing is wrong or has been wrong. Rather, it's everything that we've been doing over these past, many years that brings us to a point that allows us and enables us to change, right? And so I think for a lot of people, when I tell them to tell their stories on social media or why they need to have, a digital footprint or the value of taking their business and being much more human and real on, what your first impression was. Like I even talk about why I believe every business should have an I don't know page on their website, because we already know that nobody's perfect and nobody knows everything. If you're willing to admit what you don't know, it actually allows you to be more, it adds validity to what you do know. And when someone, is willing to admit that online, and it's definitely a change in thought process. But for me, I think one of the big perspective changes is trying to relate not only the different examples, but getting people just to re-ask questions that maybe they asked themselves 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and say, hey, let's ask it again in today's world. And I think, COVID and what we've kind of gone through in 2020, that's probably more important than anything else. It's coming back and saying, okay, we might have made these business decisions based on these different variables in our business world, but what do those variables look like today? And then what are other people doing? What are the things that we want to do? And I like the way you set it up too. Like I would say the number one piece that I talk about is people today want access to leaders, access to business, access to the people that we're working with, that we're trusting. Because I truly do believe every business is in the business of trust. But I believe if you don't start with defining what success looks like, you'll never be successful. You'll never feel as though what you're doing is actually going to get you to the place that you want. And so that's where really I try to get, open that perspective to new possibilities, but also help them kind of redefine what success looks like and then kind of work backwards from there. And it's exciting. I mean, I worked at a pet influencer event where there was actually more animals in the audience than there were people. And I will also say there was also more millionaires in the audience than there were anything else. These were all like very high, like a couple of the dogs on Instagram have 12 million followers, right? And I was helping their owners understand what their role was on social. And I've also, spoke at, large healthcare events. I've spoke at two of the largest government events, South by Southwest. I get to speak. So for me, it's so interesting because I get to help open that perspective in the not only where the future is, but also kind of redefining, what success looks like today.
We talk a lot about accountability, and we make sure that people are willing to take complete ownership of these problems. How do you? And I know you to some people, and they say, "Oh yeah, for me." What's your thought process on that? How do you respond to that? I'll let you take it from there. What are your thoughts on guys that just want someone else to do it?
So, I'm a big believer in there is definitely power in outsourcing and bringing in people to do what you aren't either familiar with or you're not comfortable doing. But I think one of the things that we kind of sometimes miss in this is the importance of self-awareness, not only in our business, but in ourselves into, hey, what are the things that I love to do and what are the things that I can help make this work? And I think in this world we're living in now, I've been a big believer in transparency, as you might have noticed, just even mentioning ADHD, and if you would have asked me 5 years ago if ADHD was something I would talk about publicly, the answer would have been no. It wasn't something that I was like, hey, I'm gonna wear it as a badge of honor. I had a moment with a mom in the audience after an event that was just so compelling that I was like, if I could impact her, just the one person, by simply mentioning, being medicated on ADHD, then I'd be willing to tell the world, right? And that's kind of where that came. But the piece that I think is most interesting is that today's consumers, today's audiences are demanding transparency. Transparency is no longer a nice to have. And in the healthcare space, this is a very interesting one when it comes to understanding data and privacy. My background in cybersecurity, I'm very familiar, especially with the US government, on privacy regulations and understanding that kind of like that balance. And I think even when we look at how we're rewriting the way that we share data, right? I have an Apple Watch that I actually wear on a everyday basis, and I give that data to my doctor for my ADHD. And part of that happened to do with, I want to give him as much data as I can. Now I had to sign 77 pieces of paper, and it felt like I was hours of signing away my world. But at the same time, there's this kind of interesting spot where we're in now, where I believe too many are maybe outsourcing, maybe not giving enough priority to certain aspects that are the front of their business. And in today's world, like, trust is that key, right? I don't care if it's, in your office to where it's online, to it's at a networking event, maybe at the local pub. That trust is essential. And I think it's really hard to build trust. It's even harder to maintain trust. And I would actually argue that it's probably the hardest thing to do is to scale trust and scale it at a range where you can actually meet the demands of what you're hoping to accomplish. But it's very easy to lose trust. And so I think one of the mistakes that in that example, RJ, is that when we look at what we're outsourcing or we're having someone bring in there, what risk are you taking on in that jeopardizing the trust and the credibility that you've been building? And I think we sometimes kind of forget that. And we're like, well, if they mess up, we can blame it on the marketing company. But today, that's no longer the case. And we've seen brands and businesses of all shapes and sizes that too often want to, hey, I'm sorry we messed up. Please trust us. We love our community. And in today's day and age, if you don't invest in your community and build that trust prior to that mistake, and let's be bold, everyone's going to make the mistake. There's going to be you're going to be hacked. The transparency may happen. Employees going to make a mistake. I always use this as my cybersecurity nugget that, we always talk about cybersecurity and getting hacked. But the number one threat in cybersecurity for every single business in the world today is not China. It's not the hackers. It's not anonymous. It's actually employees. It's called insider threat. It's an employee accidentally or on purpose sharing data or information that exposes the company. And if we think about that, if that's a guarantee, and trust is so important, we have to make sure that we are building that trust long before the guarantee mistake or exposure actually happens. And I think that's usually where I try to help brands kind of look at that and then prioritize what they're currently outsourcing.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, Brian, because I know our listeners out there, trust is, especially in this industry, it's more important that your doctor's got to have trust a lot more than your mechanic or any other type of organization. And I know that the press the damn button, the book and the podcast and everything that you're doing, whenever you talk about that, you talk about ways to create trust. So for those listeners out there, Talk about how they build up kind of that trust collateral with their audience. What are some tips? What are some things that you tell owners or practices whenever you're talking to those folks at all the conferences that you speak? But what are kind of some tactical tips that they could take away?
I love this question. This is a great one to go down this pace, because I think one of the things that we're looking at today, right, there's content is everywhere, and we see content is king. We're doing a podcast, right? The idea that like kind of putting things out there. But one of the things that I think we struggle with oftentimes is, okay, is this a marketing activity? Is this a sales activity? You know, how are we using our data that's on our website? How are we making sure that we don't violate any, privacy laws or data that we have in our own space? But the place that I always like to start is that nobody will ever say that you're helping me too much, or you're providing me too much value, or you're saving me too much time. Like no one ever, we're never going to say that. So when you're looking at building trust out of starting out, one of the most important places to start is to, how can I just help solve people's problems? Maybe it's not directly aligned in your direct business path, but maybe it has a shadow one. And I actually have a great healthcare example to that is I was speaking at an event in Scottsdale, Arizona. I used to live in Phoenix for a long while. And I stayed in contact with a gentleman that had seen me speak. And after going back and forth, we got on the phone, and he let me know, he's like, hey, I'm a dentist. I own a couple different locations in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's like, I'm a very high-end dentistry, catering to a very high-end clientele. And he's like, I want to start a podcast. And I can tell you, my very first thought was like, a podcast about teeth? Like, it was like, what? Like, I was like, it had that moment where I was like, what did I say? Because sometimes I will say statements like, I believe every business can use a podcast. And I was like, what did I say? Like, what did I do? And he was very open. He's like, here's what I know. He's like, I know that, it's no one's searching or looking. My clientele aren't ultimately looking for me as the dentist. But what I've found is that there is a network of businesses that cater to a very similar crowd that I would love to amplify their message. And what he technically created was a lifestyle podcast about things in Scottsdale, Arizona that allow you to invest in your own personal development. So one was it went from a tanning salon to a spa to a nail, and there was multiple different businesses. And his whole thing was interviewing them. And he opened it up with, hey, I'm a dentist. At the end, he gave a little bit call to action on like what his dentistry was, but it not once it was about teeth, it was about amplifying these businesses that were aligned. And a couple of the episodes went deep into like some of the people, why they started their business and the other businesses that they were inspired to. And it started to build this network. And this was about 4 years ago. And about 2 years ago, he contacted me and we got on the phone and he just said, I'm retiring from what I'm doing, but I just wanted to give you kind of validation on the back end of this. He's like, we've actually paused our podcast. I was like, wait, where's the validation coming on this? He's like, our stream of new clients is so deep that we have a waiting list that's almost a year long now because we've been exposed and put into country club conversations. We've had these ideas where there were people that we would have never got in front of. And I like to say, I won't even take credit for that. It was definitely a brainstorming idea between the two of us that we came up with the idea, and he's the one that selected all of the businesses. But I think that's a great place to think, right? Like, it's not really about like this, building trust through, how great you are, right? And that's a piece of it as well. And I like to say one of the other pieces of this is that I think it's extremely important for business leaders and businesses as a whole to tell their story. But the way that we have to think about that is, you have to tell your story by letting people in to understand who you are as a business while shining the light on them. Right. So it's not, and this is where some people are like, well, Brian, I don't want to come across as bragging or pounding my chest or telling people why my practice is the best or why, and the way that I always like to kind of situate that to help kind of facilitate that is that when you're talking about your business, the things you've done, the past, if you're doing it from a place of education, telling people how you did something, why you did something, and you're bringing them along with you on the journey, it will never come across as if you have, you're voted number one practice in 2019 and no one else is. It'll always come across as, hey, together we're learning. And so I think that's a beautiful way to kind of approach this idea. And I think this also comes into this idea of like, how do I start to gradually, build that rapport? And like you said, this is a very trust business. It's a very, everything from reviews to, word of mouth, even switching practices, right? For me, that was a big thing after going through my divorce and having to go and get my own and figuring out what I wanted. And I remember I did a lot of Twitter polls and surveys saying, hey, who should I sign up for with healthcare now as an entrepreneur on my own? And I really went into tapping into my entrepreneur leadership network. And I can tell you that there's such a difference between someone saying, hey, this is who I work with versus, hey, this is my doctor and I love them because of this. And most of the time it has to do with a lot of these other characteristics around those different pieces.
Well, that's a great point. And it's the example that you gave is great because it ties back really well to what RJ was talking about earlier as far as, setting the vision first, and then from there, taking ownership of the issue. If you don't find a different way to put yourself out there. And like you said, express your why. Your why is often way more important than the what. If you can get people aligned with why you do what you do, they're going to buy into the what easy. So speaking of that a little bit, you mentioned something there that I know you talk a lot about, which is the importance of people and organizations kind of, sharing their story. So for the listeners out there who so far are like, I love this, I love the energy, I love everything he's talking about. How do you typically work with those folks? Is it, who do you look for? Who do you like to work with? Step us through that process.
Yeah. So for me, a lot of times, it's funny. For a lot of the big businesses that I've worked with, their leadership, I always like to say, for some reason, I like the most unsexy of brands and businesses and helping them tell a story, right? Like the three-letter Fortune 500 enterprise technology company that starts with an I. That's been my client for 6 years, right? And I love working with them because it was. One of the surveys we did with IBM was we were talking to millennials and Gen Z, and a majority of them didn't know IBM was still in business. And the ones that did thought it was only the company that owned Watson that was on Jeopardy, right? Like that, literally the parameter. And it was a shell shock for a company that promoted themselves as being in business for, 60, 85 years or whatever that piece was. And so for me, when I look at this, I think one of the big pieces that really stands out is that I found so much value in working with entrepreneurs, leaders, business owners that have that pride, that passion for what they're doing already, right? That to me is the greatest place to start, because it's not about pulling the story or and part of it comes into and my dad was a business owner, not in the healthcare space. He actually was a candy business owner. He owned a peanut brittle company that he owned for many years throughout, and recently it sold to Mars Candy. And one of the things my dad had always kind of established was all these moments where what worked for him. And I think for business owners that are out there today, practice owners, people that there's the way that you talk about your business with your friends, with your significant other, with your kids, when you're on an airplane sitting next to someone and making small talk when we used to be able to fly, those conversations are truly what work really well online. But we have a tendency to not do that, right? We as soon as we go online, we're like, okay, how do I market? How do I sell? Okay, this is LinkedIn, it's professional. Therefore, it should be my resume, which last time I checked, no one hires anyone, a doctor, based simply on a resume, right? And even changing that language. And I think a lot of this to me when I'm working with them is kind of breaking that down. And I always say, try to record yourself the next time you're talking to someone about what you do. And then just look back and say, wow, these are the examples I use. These are I didn't talk about, hey, this is my perfect client. I said, these are the problems I like to solve, or this is the reason I expanded my practice to this one community, because I saw the need in this community and I went after, and I think that's a piece that is really, really vital in kind of that discovery. And so that helps us kind of define what this success of telling your story is online. And then really the next piece of that journey is trying to quantify tangible goals that are measurable that can help you achieve that, right? And I think that's a big one, because we oftentimes are like, well, I know what success is. I need to go boil the ocean, or I need to change the world, right? And then, and for me, empathy is a big one on this one. I talk a lot about that. Even I dedicate 2 chapters in the book to empathy, because I think we're like, okay, I want to help make the world a more empathetic place. And we're like, we sit there and but then we look at it and we're like, well, where do I start with that? Like, how do I make who do I have to, how many people do I have to talk to impact? And what I challenge back on that is that the best place to start in making the world a more empathetic place is actually yourself, allowing people to be empathetic towards you. The more transparent, the more open you are, allows the people around you to be empathetic towards you, to relate with you, to connect with your vulnerabilities. And all of a sudden, if we each inspire one more person to be more open, to allow more people to be empathetic to them, we start to make that groundswell. And so that's usually where I start. It's defining success, mapping these kind of tangible goals. And let's face it, in the digital virtual world, and I know for many, I've been preaching and trying to help people see that this is where we need to go. COVID kind of just kicked everybody there. Yeah. And as much as people in my community were like, Brian, you must be so happy. I was like, I'm not a big fan of forcing change, because I know when people are forced to change, it's gonna be a very unhappy, short-term, experience. But if we look at where we're at now, right, we've been forced to adapt to this new world we're in at the moment. But I think if we take a step back and we realize that we have this beautiful opportunity to shape the future that we want to work in, shape the future that we want to build our brand in, because we're all in this new we're not there yet, but a post-COVID world of kind of remapping everything from how we work, where we work, the things that matter in our lives. I travel, for me, I travel a little over 200,000 miles a year, 76 countries. And the 4 months that I've been down are the most I've been home since I was in college. So since 2003, because I've traveled my entire career, and little things that are changing. And so for me, when I look at a lot of the things that we're here is, and this is my plea, is that I think the greatest time to embrace change, to do things different, to put yourself out there is right now. We are extremely forgiving. We're all kind of figuring this all out as we go. We've seen really bad virtual events. I think every person's been on a bad Zoom call where someone can't find the mute button, or they only find the mute button, or
that awkward first 10 seconds when somebody's connecting to audio and you're like, do I stare at them? Do I pretend to write something over here?
Where do I look? Should I mute my button? Should I act as if I don't see them coming on, or do they know that their username is their kid's nickname for them, whatever it may be. And I think that's kind of the beauty of where we're at now. And I'm a big believer in that together we can shape this. And the saying I've been using is we got this. We together are going to get through this, and we're going to shape this new normal or this new future. But I think this also comes into us having to ask the hard questions again. Like you said, be accountable for the things that we want. And also, if there's things that you want to accomplish and you're not sure what will work, right? Should I do video? Should I create audio? Should I create a podcast? Do I need to update my website with more video pictures, or these questions? The only way you will know is if you try it, right? In this space right now, you won't know what works until you do it. You won't know what doesn't work until you do it. And we are living right now in the best time to do that.
Well, let's go down that route for our listeners real quick, because I love that principle, and I think that's great. I would encourage everybody out there just to start trying stuff. But one of the things we get a lot of questions about from our listeners and our clients, or just people that we talk to every day, RJ and I, through iProv, the marketing company, is about how to track progress. And I know that you've got a really good principle that you talk about all the time, which is test, tweak, and repeat. So let's talk a little bit about, all right, cool. Let's start a podcast. Let's do a video series about common health questions. For listeners out there, what are some things that you should say, hey, here's the metrics you should look at? Because as humans, and even we do it in the marketing world, we try something, we put out 50 vlogs, and then we look and we only have 100 subscribers on YouTube still. Ugh. Well, do I trash that thing, or do I get to 100, 200? Talk about that principle of test, tweak, and repeat. And then also kind of what metrics should people look at out there, our healthcare listeners, to see if they're on the right track? What success metrics should they be looking for?
So one of the first places I start, and that's a great example with the YouTube channel, right? The place that I dissect that from at the beginning without even knowing any of those parameters is, why the hell do you want subscribers? Right? Let's remove these tangible variables that, I mean, and social media has been the catalyst for us to be extremely lazy in the measurements that we're using, because for the rest of marketing world, we would take multiple variables and pull them together for us to manage success, right? Like think about a billboard on the side of the road, right? Like, I mean, think about how we project ROI of a billboard on the side of a road, right? Like tangible eyeballs based on the amount of traffic, based on the amount, like there's so many things that go into that. And then social media came around, and the social networks gave us these very lazy metrics, as in likes and retweets and views and subscribers. And we all of a sudden became kind of, hey, we're just going to be, okay, we're going to measure against that. And we couldn't really link that directly to a business goal. And as much as I love social and digital and content, I am business focused. I am not a .org, I'm a .com for a reason. I want to help brands and businesses use these solutions to move their business needle. If it's not, we need to adapt, right? And I think one of the other pieces of this is that consistency is the most important. But on top of consistency, you have to layer in managing expectations of yourself and your audience. And what I mean by that, because when I say consistency, and if you're a podcast listener, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do something every week. If I say consistency and you're someone that works in media or TV, you're like, wait, I have to do something every day of the week, right? Or, and what I like to kind of step back on is it's not about the amount, right? You get to determine that as the creator, as the business owner. The most important element is you're actually delivering on the consistency that you're saying. So if you're saying, hey, I'm going to create a video once a month, you must deliver that once a month, and you must be clear with that language. And that can be everything from, hey, maybe I'm not active on Twitter, but we have a Twitter account. Why not put in your bio, manage the expectation in your bio? Hey, we don't check this account very often, maybe once a week. We are much more active in replying to comments on our Facebook page. But if you want to wait for a reply, please give us that kind of bandwidth. Like managing that expectation very transparently. And then in like the test, tweak, and repeat mantra there is that I say press the damn button, right? Which is pretty much you don't know what works until you try it. But here's the thing: once you figure out what's working, now it's your job to put some strategy behind it. Now it's your job to lean into what is working and kind of dial that up a little bit more, right? And so I think when I say test, tweak, and repeat, sometimes people will say, well, Brian, you mean press the damn button? You want us to just throw out crappy stuff all the time? And it's like, no. There is plenty of crappy stuff out there on a regular basis that is flooding the world as we're living in it now. Because I look at it and say, I would rather have one great piece of content that I work hard on getting in front of my audience than 5 good pieces of content that I can't figure out how to get in front of my audience, right? And that's the interesting part that we're living in now. The easy part is creating the content. Like an iPhone, I live streamed the Super Bowl. I did 24 hours of interviews at Super Bowl 50 from an iPhone. They hired me to and I did it all from an iPhone sitting outside of Super Bowl 50 in San Francisco. And I always say, like, if the Super Bowl was willing to do this high quality on the brand channels with an iPhone, like none of us have an excuse from using our smart device, right? Like for doing that, for creating content. But when we look at that as like kind of like, hey, content's the easy part. The hard part is getting it in front of the right audience. But I would even say that the most difficult part is getting in front of the right audience at the right time. Wow. And what I think is most important there is this is where it comes into what we're measuring and how we're going about it. Like I would challenge everyone. Social media has also kind of got us in this idea where we need to go viral. We need to gain subscribers. We need to grow a lot of these tangible numbers. But if we asked business owners, if I got you one new customer a day, 365 days a year, would you be happy? I know almost every business would be like, yes, give me that. Yet we were like, how can I get this video to get 1 million views? And so I work very hard in the listening space with my clients, with leaders saying, okay, have you asked your audience? If you have an email newsletter, if you have something that goes out to ask your audience, what is the channel that you would most likely tune into me on, right? And I can tell you, like, probably the place that most aren't thinking about today is LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn fanboy at a very high level, and I mentioned this before. It's because of business. When I went back in January of this year, and we were looking at our closed leads in 2019, 68% of my closed leads in my business, and I'm a full-time keynote speaker at a fairly high price range, and my keynote fees range from $15,000 to $20,000 per event. 68% of those closed leads came from LinkedIn. 68%. I love Instagram. Twitter is my most popular. I've been blogging on my website for 10 plus years. I've done over 3,000 live streams. LinkedIn, and I can tell you what I did on LinkedIn for that entire year, and I've actually been doing it for a little bit more than a year, was I upload one video a week directly to LinkedIn that is between 3 to 5 minutes that I record on my iPhone, usually at a thought leadership level where I'm like, what's up LinkedIn, Brian Fanzo here. I want to talk about empathy in this new world, and I talk a little bit about it. Don't give a call to action. I say, I hope I inspired you guys to think differently. I end the video, right? And to me, that LinkedIn works so well. And so the interesting thing about this, when I look at breaking down these numbers and what to measure, I often tell people, I will take 2 LinkedIn comments over 50 Instagram comments, because the audience for me on Instagram says, Brian, I love what you talk about. I think it's so cool at speaking. Let me know when you're speaking in my town. My audience on LinkedIn says, Brian, I love your topics. I love what you're speaking about. How can I hire you to speak to my company? Right? And let's face it, that's a shift. And so this is where I think the big piece of this comes down to us being bold enough or open enough to ask our clients, our customers, our target audience where they would prefer or where they want to be. And then the other piece of this is being willing to listen. I think this is one of those mistakes. And as a futurist, I can say, oftentimes people will say, well, Brian, I hear you, I've interviewed a little over 35 creators on TikTok that have over 1 million followers that are making 6 figures in revenue. And people are like, wait, Brian, so you're talking TikTok? And I'm like, well, here's what I work with my clients, and this is where I focus, is that we have to market and connect with our customers where they're at today while listening for where they're going tomorrow. Right. And so for me, the interviewing on TikTok had a lot less to do with TikTok and a lot more to do with, I wanted to understand why nurses, stay-at-home moms, military, attorneys were creating content on TikTok and they weren't creating it on other places. And the most interesting development of these interviews that I've done was they told me, I've always felt like I had a voice and a story to tell, but I didn't feel like I was a creator or a storyteller or a speaker or a video producer or a podcaster. And they're like, so I got on TikTok and I could just lip sync to a song. And then I got comfortable with video. So then I got to use my own voice. And then all of a sudden I found my tribe, right? Stay-at-home mom hashtag on TikTok, for those that don't know, gets 4 billion uses in the last 12 months, 4 billion uses, right? And so if people finding their tribe and finding their people, this is where I think all businesses we can step back and say, I don't care if you have 100 subscribers, if 80 of them are very influential in your network, right? And I think the last piece of this that I really think is overlooked, and I think we can all find value, and especially in this space, is we oftentimes say we have to reach the person that is our target customer or our target partner. And I'm going to challenge you to not reach, you don't have to reach that person. Because some people that are listening to this right now are like, Brian, hey, this is cool. This guy's passionate. He's that millennial guy talking fast, but my audience isn't on LinkedIn, or my audience isn't on social media. I know all of you are saying that. And here's my answer to that is that it's almost more important to reach the audience that influences your customers to make a decision. And what I mean by that is the person that's like I said, I reached out to my community asking them which healthcare provider I should switch to. But when you think about it, it's not often about having to reach the person that swipes the credit card or comes in your office. It's, hey, does that person listen to their sister-in-law when they're saying, hey, I know you've been working on this, had a side hustle for a long while, and you've had your own healthcare. I've been working for an enterprise company. Now that I'm retiring, I would love to know what you would recommend, right? And it doesn't mean that you had to reach the person that is retiring to actually have value with the content you're creating. If you reach the person that influenced them to make the decision that they're making, and this can go in all different directions. I mean, I've worked with a skinny jean company that targeted 30 to 45-year-old females. And we built a Snapchat campaign that targeted 13 to 18-year-old females because through their research, they realized that group, that mom group, was most influenced on which jeans were trending based on their kids and the people in their network or in their neighborhood on what jeans they were wearing. And so we didn't focus on bringing the jean company in front of the people wearing the jeans. It was rather bringing the jean company in front of the people that influence that target audience. And I think we can, if we all take that approach, it allows us almost a different angle to reach an entirely new audience in kind of a creative way.
No, that is great stuff. You know, you talk about finding your tribe. You've spoke about your speaking. We're kind of wrapping up into what we call this kind of final round, and I want to cap off our conversation with something else that you're passionate and talk a lot about, and this is concept of ADHD. You know, if you could, picture yourself and imagine you're standing in front of a room of new physicians. A lot of our audience are actually new physicians or new healthcare providers trying to figure out how to grow their business. But take that even business part aside. You're able to talk to these new physicians. What would you say to them? Can you give them 2 or 3 pieces of advice, and maybe in particular on the ADHD topic? If you knew you've just got this audience full of people, what is something maybe they don't know, or what are some strategies that they need to know about high performers like you and ADHD, or just riff on that if you were spending on top of them, and in kind of capping off the conversation on where we're at.
Sure, I love that, and I call myself a pager-wearing millennial. I actually have a pager. And usually when I'm working with healthcare providers, they're the only other ones that also have pagers at this moment. But the reason I call myself a pager-wearing millennial...
That doesn't work, does it?
No, it does not. The second one that I own, I did ship out to a friend who is in AI, and he's building in a little computer that will actually have the pager go off every time someone tweets my name during a presentation, and have it kind of like play into it. So it'll be a little fun there. But
that's cool.
Yeah, so I was born in 1981, so I'm on the cusp of that millennial generation. Yeah. And so when I talk about ADHD, one of the things that I kind of am very open and transparent about is that at 11 years old, my mom was actually told that she needed to medicate me. And she went back to her friend group. And so, this is 1992. Her friend group had the kind of like that stigma that if you're medicating your children, you're a bad mom. And unfortunately, it wasn't something that was talked about in my house, mental health, those pieces. And then I was very blessed. I was very fortunate to grow up in a very, loving family, and very, family that supported myself and my 2 younger brothers. And then, as I went through high school and college, I was the kid with perfect attendance that loved going to school but didn't like going to class, and that every teacher loved, but they couldn't get me to get good grades. And even the classes that I loved, I couldn't pay attention in it to the level I really wanted to. And even looking at it like as a holistic, I've read more books in the 8 years since being medicated than I did in the first 31 years of my life. Right? Just the idea of that focus, but. One of the things I want to kind of tie that into is that throughout my 20s, and we had moved to Arizona, I had gone to multiple doctors, and I believe one of the things for me was this idea of because medication or because talking about your flaws or what what was going on in your life wasn't something as open or as something that today that I feel is much more a part of the conversation. I feel like there was multiple opportunities where I missed kind of sharing that with my physician, my doctor, saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. And honestly, it wasn't until my youngest brother was diagnosed ADHD, was being medicated, and I was telling him that I was having this trouble sleeping. We had done a lot of sleeping tests for a long while on just my sleeping. And since I was a senior in high school, I haven't slept, didn't really need more than 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and I could be, as live wired as I am at the moment, right? That's just how I was. And it really wasn't until I had this a doctor when I was 31, and I remember walking out of that doctor's office as one of the most important days of my life, because I walked out of there not excited to be diagnosed, not excited to have medicine, but to realize that, hey, I am different. I do operate differently, but it's not that I'm broken, or it's not that the way that I'm doing everything is wrong. I just have to approach things much differently, right? And that to me was such an eye-opening experience. And then trying to figure out how to learn how that works in my life and how it works with the people that I work with. And I can tell you, it wasn't until the last 3 years. So I'm now 39 years old. In the last 3 years, I became very transparent and open with everyone on my team, even my partners, where I would tell them, one of the things that I do a drug holiday every week. So one day of the week I don't take my medicine, and that's part of it was my physicians, kind of giving me the idea that he didn't want me to build up the tolerance that my younger brother had, to where it changed his personality and he no longer is on the medicine. That was a big concern of mine. I'm very blessed that I have not moved in prescription in over 5 years. I've had the same prescription level in 5 years. I think a lot of it has to do with that, but that taking a day off, and I have 2 children. I'm divorced. I'm co-parenting, so like I have my kids on the weekend. Finding a day to take a mental health break and invest in myself requires me to be open with my partners, my clients. Hey, this is a day that I'm going to struggle with staying focused, or I'm not going to reply to the email that was prioritized, and becoming self-aware of that. And I think, if anything that I'm excited about, and you could even use TikTok or some of the things that are out there, is that yes, social media is exposing a world of a lot of bad and a lot of things that is kind of disgusting, but it's also creating movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter and a lot of things that are happening. And this is where I look at it and say that social media hasn't created this badness. It's actually given us a microphone and the ability to amplify, to stop the badness from happening, right? And I think that's an interesting way to look at it. But it's also giving us an opportunity to examine how we're having conversations about certain things, right? And so for me, like looking back in my 20s, someone asking like, hey, Brian, do you think you might have ADHD? My answer would have been no. Like, don't give me that scarlet letter. Don't put that on me. Even though I knew reading a book and struggling, and paying attention, even in courses that I loved. And, I played college hockey, so I had a mandatory study hall hours and a lot of the things that we had in college. And, it was a very frustrating world for me. But I think if I take it all, encompass today, one of those big pieces was self-awareness. And being like, okay, let's just, I set up a time-lapse camera on myself for an 8-hour workday. And I go back and look and say, Brian, what were you doing for these 48 minutes? And it was like, oh, I was working on a graphic, or I was scrolling Instagram, or whatever it may be. And I started to try to, adapt my day, and, even finding out which part of my days I'm most productive. So I'm very active in the morning. Those that know me, I block my calendar usually 1 to 4 p.m. I don't take on anything because that's my least productive time, and I kind of give myself a break. I oftentimes come back and work better at the end of the evening. And so I think when we're looking at a lot of the world we're in today, there is a lot of conversation. I'm a huge advocate for mental health. I do a lot of sharing the struggles and also the good and the bad of all of it. I'm on Adderall, so Adderall has plenty of side effects and things that I have to be very conscious about. But I also think there is this unity in the fact that our vulnerabilities are actually what unite us and help us find our tribe more so than our strengths, right? And for me, that all comes to, like, that's the motivator for me whenever someone says, and I did this probably 3 weeks ago, as I shared, a picture of a day that I was really struggling to have energy and stay motivated. And part of that was, if I'm doing that and I have a great network of friends and colleagues, and I have children and family that love me, what about the person that doesn't have that? What about the person that is struggling, going through the same thing I'm doing without the things that I'm very thankful for? And so I do believe we can have these conversations, but I think one of the things that we can look at it from a mental health perspective, and I like working just kind of in context, like the 2 companies that I work with in a charity, volunteering my time, is No Kid Hungry. I've been on the social council for No Kid Hungry now for 7 years, where our goal is to end childhood hunger here in America. And we work very hard on that, on content and with influencers, working with chefs. And the other one is with a company called Stop a Race, which is focused on ending child trafficking. A very difficult conversation to have as a dad of 3 girls that are 10, 9, and 6. And I think the reason I bring these up is that a lot of these conversations are very difficult to have. The idea of, we created a virtual reality of what it would be like to be in a box as a child, and taking off that headset, you're crying and also wanting to volunteer and open your checkbook because you're like, I can't even imagine. And I bring all of that up to say, like, part of the difficult conversations that we're all learning to try to have, there's also this kind of piece of finding the people that are trusted in your space to kind of work with them to figure out how to bring in more people and kind of extend that. And I don't want to use the word influencer marketing, but it has a tendency of a piece of that where it says, like, I've actually been, I've tweeted out and been the healthcare provider that I'm with has actually reshared my content multiple times on social, which completely surprised me, right? Like they reached out, they asked me to sign, but like they were like, Brian, we didn't know that, this is your box, but like the fact you're having this conversation might open the door for some future conversations. So I think we are in a really great time that the vulnerabilities are going to happen, because I can tell you the thing that gets me up excited in the morning and excited for what I do is I truly do believe with social media, technology, digital, that the world should be a less lonely place, that suicide rates should be going down, that the fact that people are feeling this disconnect, and COVID has been, I live by myself. I had moved closer to where my children live here in Virginia, and my girlfriend for a long while lives in Atlanta, and we shared residence. And because of my travel, well, all of a sudden with COVID, I was locked and loaded here in my house for 4 months without seeing her, without traveling, and it was a very lonely time, very disconnected, and opened my mind to a lot of this space. But when I look at all the things that are available for us, we have the opportunity to listen, to be part of the conversations, and then to approach things in kind of unique or different ways. And I think for me, when I look at that like early 20s space, if there was someone that I could relate to, and it wasn't a doctor asking me if I thought I had ADHD, but it was either people through video content or social, or even highlighted use cases of someone that was high functioning, right? And that's a big piece for me when someone sees me on a stage in front of 12,000 people, and I'm saying, hey, I'm diagnosed ADHD and I'm currently medicated. The amount of people that come up to me and say, Brian, I'm medicated for this, or Brian, I struggled for this. Most of the time it's not ADHD. It's most of the time it's something else that they're all struggling with. And so I guess that's where I would look at this, because I love what I do because I want to help us get to that path. And I think transparency is important. Amplifying vulnerabilities is important. And also kind of re-looking at, I, as a dad, like with my 3 daughters, I have conversations with my daughters that I don't think my parents would have ever thought they would have had with me. And it's that, it's that growing example of even COVID, and we had someone that was in our family circle that had passed away from COVID, and kind of explaining what a pandemic was to my children and kind of having that conversation. And so I'm a proponent, I'm a believer. I try to practice it with what I share, that we can put that out to the world. We can try to allow our vulnerabilities to connect us, and hopefully, make the world a little bit less lonely of a place.
Well, just in our short time of talking to you, I can tell that you're 100% authentic in your passion for what you do. So for the listeners out there, I know that translates out through the audio or video or wherever you're absorbing this content. So Brian, we are privileged to have you on our little podcast. We appreciate you so much. For those listeners out there that want more information, or they're listening to your message and they want to get more content from you, or even if they want to engage with you or your team, tell them about the best ways to kind of reach out to you, how to find out more information about you, all the kind of regular contact info stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So my brand is iSocialFans, the letter I, social, and then FANZ or a Z. My last name is Fanzo, and I early on created 9 Twitter accounts with fans, FANZ at the end, and the iSocialFans one ended up sticking. So that's my business and brand as well. Every social network you could imagine, from LinkedIn to Pinterest to Tumblr, I'm there. I always say, don't follow me everywhere. Pick one. I'm very active on all of the channels, but I don't recommend everyone to be active everywhere. Pick your favorite one. I have 2 podcasts that are currently active in the podcast space. So if you're a podcast fan, I have FOMO Fans, which stands for the fear of missing out. I've been doing that podcast for over 3 years now. It's a solo podcast, so it's me ranting kind of on different topics, everything from entrepreneurship to marketing to social media to ADHD and public speaking. And then my newest podcast is Press the Damn Button, where it's an interview style podcast where I'm interviewing different leaders in my network on what buttons they've pressed throughout their career that have got them to where they're currently going. And then if I do a lot in the virtual space and a lot of the speaking world. I speak to big brands, I speak to small businesses. I've been doing a lot of executive meetings where I come in and host 30 minutes or an hour of conversation. BrianFanzo.com. So just my BrianFanzo.com is the website for all of that up there. I create a lot of free content. I really love what I'm doing. My big piece of it is speaking. So the last one is I created a YouTube channel focused on virtual presentations, being better on Zoom, what this virtual world works, all those different things. And so if you just put into your browser pressthedamnbutton.video. So pressthedamnbutton.video into your browser. It'll redirect you to my YouTube channel. I'm uploading a couple of videos a week. It's all on virtual. I'm not doing anything else on that channel, and really just trying to help level up and raise the bar on virtual side. But this is a pleasure. I love, part of the thing I love about my job is the ability to connect with great people doing great things and helping kind of share that message and hopefully connect our world. So I really appreciate you guys having me on.
No, thanks so much, Brian. And all those links that Brian talked about, he's active on all of them. We'll include all those links in the show notes also. So Brian Fanzo, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Brian did not make me a liar. I felt like that was a great interview. RJ, a couple takeaways that you had from talking to Brian.
Well, I just liked all of the real world stories that he had. He wasn't name dropping as much as he was showing the variety of different types of organizations he's helped. And it allowed me to really kind of put myself in their shoes and be empathetic on what they were struggling with at the time. So just love that he was able to tie all that together.
Yeah, I love those takeaways. Being empathetic, finding your tribe, being vulnerable, all of those different things, and just trying stuff new. I like what he said. If you're out there and you're trying to figure out ways to grow your business and you're thinking about ideas, just go ahead and start. Hit that button. Go ahead and hit the damn button. Hit record. Start putting stuff out there, and start putting yourself out there as an organization.
Love it. Love it. Well, Jordan, thanks so much. I would tell our audience, he came to us by recommendation. If you can recommend a speaker to us, we'd love to reach out to him, get them on. We're doing this for our audience. If there are things you'd like us to ask more often, if there are types of guests you want us to go after, and even if you can't recommend someone individually, we'd love it. Please like, subscribe, write a review, and do us one favor. Forward this to one person. Just one person that needs to hear this message. Forward it over, and we would be eternally grateful.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. iProv Made podcast out. Thanks, RJ. Until next time.